Monday mornings were always slow to start in our department, the kind where people shuffled in clutching their second coffees, waiting for the caffeine to kick in before real work began. But that morning, the glass-walled conference room was already packed. The hum of side conversations cut short as Declan Rourke strutted in. He was the kind of manager who could turn a staff meeting into a one-man show, all sharp suits and a smile that never touched his eyes. I'd barely settled into my chair when he cleared his throat with theatrical weight. "You're done here. Lyra. An intern could do your job." The words didn't echo, but they didn't have to. The air seemed to thin. My team. My people froze. Jonas stopped mid-note, pen suspended in the air. Maya Serrano, the intern fresh out of college, stared down at her notepad like it might hide her. Behind her. Greg shifted uncomfortably, the creak of his chair far too loud in the silence. Declan leaned back, clearly savoring the moment. His eyes glittered like he'd just scored a personal victory. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. My hands were steady as I slid my ID badge across the table. The thin plastic made a muted scrape against the polished wood, but it might as well have been a gavel strike. Without a word, I stood. The legs of my chair screeched against the floor, a long, drawn-out sound that made a few people flinch. I left it pushed out, not bothering to tuck it back in. The glass door whispered shut behind me, sealing the room in with its stale air and forced smiles. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed, a steady backdrop to my footsteps. As I passed the break area, voices carried just far enough for me to hear. Declan's, low but smug Maya. "You'll pick up Lyra's workflows by the end of the day. Should be simple enough." Her reply was a hesitant murmur I couldn't catch, but I didn't need to. I could picture the panic in her eyes. She'd shadowed me for 2 days and hadn't even located the right terminal for the compliance vault. I kept walking, my heels clicking in even rhythm, the sound threading through the corridor until it faded into the steady pulse of the elevator descending. The doors closed, and the city skyline came into view through the narrow glass panel, cold and bright. The building shrank behind me as I stepped out into the street, the crisp air hitting my face like a clean break, carrying me toward whatever came next. 5 years earlier, the office had been a different kind of battlefield. The vendor we relied on for our compliance infrastructure folded overnight, leaving us with a half-functioning system and a stack of government contracts on the brink of invalidation. Departments panicked. Legal was already drafting breach notifications. Our CTO at the time, Harold Wexler, paced the server room muttering acronyms like prayers. The compliance vault was the heart of it all, a closed system that stored every federal transaction, timestamp, an audit trail we needed to stay in business. Without it, every contract over a certain dollar amount would be flagged, frozen, and eventually revoked. There was no quick fix. The vendor's code was a mess, a decade of sloppy patches stitched together by people who'd long since moved on. I remember locking myself in my cubicle with nothing but a terminal window and a cold pot of coffee for 72 hours. I rewrote the bridge between our internal systems and the federal compliance registry, line by line, until the vault synced again. No manuals, no backup team, just my memory, and the desperate knowledge that failure meant we'd lose everything when it worked. There was no champagne, no company-wide announcement, just a quiet handshake from Harold and a personal note in my file, custodian of record. My digital signature became the key to the vault, the legal anchor for every contract tied to that system. The protocol was clear if a custodian's role ended. The company had 36 hours to register a replacement with matching credentials. If not, the vault would enter auto-lockdown, suspending all workflows until compliance was re-established. It was a safeguard I'd personally helped design after watching another firm lose their contracts when a certified officer resigned without notice. Declan had no idea what those 3 words custodian of record meant. To him, I was just another middle-tier employee, an aging part of a machine he was hired to modernize. I knew better. I'd been the keystone holding the arch of this company's most valuable work in place. And now, walking away from that glass-walled room, I was already considering what would happen if the keystone simply wasn't there anymore. That night, the house was silent except for the soft hum of my old desktop tower. I sat in my home office, a mug of cooling tea at my elbow, and powered on the private offline console I'd built years ago. It wasn't company property. This machine had never touched their network. It was mine, a personal archive of every compliance patch, vault update, and security note I'd written since taking on the custodian role. I started with the backups. My fingers moved without hesitation. Select logs, verify integrity, copy to encrypted storage. Each folder was a chapter of my career, thousands of hours of work compressed into strings of code and documentation. I exported my complete access history from the vault, printed out the admin token records, and archived the last 2 years of renewal confirmations. Then I reached the part I'd been turning over in my mind since the moment Declan said those words. The admin token panel. The key. I navigated to the command line, typed the sequence, and watched the cursor blink beside the final prompt, revoke custodian token YN. It wasn't anger that pushed my finger to the Y key. It was the quiet certainty that I was done letting other people cash in on my work while pretending I was replaceable. 15 years of patching crises at 2 a.m., keeping contracts afloat when everyone else went home, and hearing good job only when someone's job depended on it. Declan's smirk in that conference room had just been the last straw. I hit enter. The system responded instantly. Custodian token revoked. Replacement required within 36 hours to maintain compliance. I leaned back, letting the chair creak under me. Out there, in the sterile glow of the company's server racks, the countdown had already begun, invisible to everyone but the vault itself. I closed the console, sipped the last of my tea, and felt something I hadn't in years: control. They'd built their empire on a foundation I had poured, reinforced, and guarded. Now, for the first time, I was the one deciding how long that foundation would hold. By the next morning, the first signs were already there, faint but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Maya was logged in at my old workstation, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between the unfamiliar interface and the sticky note clutter around the monitor. Jonas Pell, the junior engineer, stood beside her with a mug of coffee and a puzzled frown. On her screen, a warning box pulsed in dull amber Vault 41 custodian undefined. Beneath it, a string of error codes scrolled like an impatient ticker. "Does this happen a lot?" Maya asked, glancing at Jonas. "Not really," he said, leaning closer. "Could be a bad sync, or I don't know," before either could dig deeper. Declan appeared in the doorway, all pressed suit and practiced confidence. "Legacy noise," he announced, waving at the screen like it was a smudge on glass. "Ignore it and keep going. We've got deadlines." Jonas opened his mouth to protest, but Declan had already moved on, calling over his shoulder. "That's the thing about old systems, plenty of drama. No real danger, 2 floors down, in legal." Claire Niles was working through the quarterly filings when she spotted something odd. The compliance report for the federal contracts had a missing entry in the custodian confirmation section. No replacement name, no signature. Just a red highlighted pending. She paused, tapping her pen against the desk. "That's strange," she murmured. "It should have been updated within hours of a personnel change, especially for a custodian role." She made a note to check with IT after her morning meeting, but the thought lingered like an itch. Meanwhile, in the server logs, the system kept trying to verify a signature that no longer existed, each failed attempt quietly stacking up behind the scenes. The countdown continued, hidden from those who didn't know it was ticking. Somewhere between the cubicles and the corner offices, the gap between appearance and reality widened, thin as a hairline crack in glass. And like any fracture under pressure, it was only a matter of time before it spread. Helena Price was not the type to rattle easily. I'd seen her keep a straight face through production outages that had other executives ready to crawl under the table. But that morning, the audit trail rejected alert flashing on her screen made her jaw tighten. She pulled up the compliance interface, drilling through the verification logs. There it was, my name, still stamped across every active contract record as the sole custodian. No replacement listed, no pending transfer filed. She scrolled again, as if the system might reveal a hidden update she'd somehow missed. It didn't. Helena dialed Declan directly. "We've got a serious problem," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "Federal systems are rejecting our audit trail. The custodian field hasn't been updated since Lyra left. That's a compliance breach waiting to happen." On the other end, I could almost hear his smirk. "Helena, relax. We're modernizing. Lyra's old processes are being phased out. Maya's taking over. The system just hasn't caught up yet." "This isn't about catching up," she said sharply. "Without a verified custodian, we could lose every federal contract. This isn't optional paperwork. It's the legal anchor." Declan chuckled like she'd told a joke he'd already heard. "I appreciate the concern, but it's under control. Let's not spook everyone over a database hiccup." Helena hung up without answering. A moment later, she was on the line with Claire Niles in legal. "Claire, I'm flagging a high-risk compliance gap custodian role, vacant. No replacement filed. This needs immediate escalation, but within minutes. Declan's override came through, issue resolved. No legal escalation required." Helena stared at the notification, her lips pressed thin. She knew it wasn't resolved. The gap was still there, buried beneath a layer of managerial denial. By the time she closed her laptop, the alert was still pulsing on her screen, steady and unblinking, as if it knew it would be back, and somewhere beyond the office walls. The clock I'd started kept counting down, second by second. By late afternoon, the ripples had reached the top floor. Adrian Cross didn't usually involve himself in operational bottlenecks unless they threatened revenue, and this one did. Legal had sent him a short, clipped summary, millions in federal transactions, sitting in review status. Unable to process because the system couldn't verify the custodian signature. From his office overlooking the Potomac, he fired off an email with the subject line, "Urgent, did you leave?" The body was even shorter. "Lyra, I've been told there's a disruption related to your role. Please confirm your status." At that moment, I was sitting at my kitchen table, a gentle rain tapping against the window, steam curling from my mug of chamomile. The subject line blinked in my inbox, his name unmistakable. I read it once, twice, then let the screen go dark without typing a word. Across town, procurement was running its own triage, a bulk renewal for secure transport services standard. Recurring had bounced 3 times. Each attempt ended with the same system flag, authorization failed, custodian, undefined. The manager, a woman named Marion who prided herself on spotless quarterly reports, was pacing her office, phone pressed to her ear, in finance. The mood was shifting from mild irritation to quiet alarm. Greg, who'd been in that morning meeting when Declan let me go, stared at a frozen transaction log that refused to move past pending verification. He refreshed the page, as if persistence alone might change the result. It didn't. I set my mug down and leaned back in my chair, the rhythm of the rain steady in the background. Somewhere in those glass towers, people were starting to connect dots they didn't even know existed last week. The air over there would be thick with tension, full of whispered questions and sidelong glances toward Declan's office. The clock was still running, silent and steady, and every stuck order was another weight pulling the rope tighter. By the time anyone decided to act, that rope might already be past the point of untying. By mid-morning, Declan was making his rounds with the kind of swagger that came from convincing himself a problem was solved. I heard later that he'd strolled into the operations pit, clapping his hands like a coach before a big game. Good news, everyone, he announced. It found a workaround. The vault's fine. Back to business. Maya looked relieved. Jonas less so. Helena stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, saying nothing. When Declan left, she caught Jonas's eye and motioned him over. "It's not fixed," she said quietly. "What they've done is build a shell and outer interface that makes it look like the vault's operational. The core's still locked. No compliance sync, no verified signature." Jonas frowned. "So the errors are just hidden now." "Exactly. They'll resurface. And when they do, it'll be worse. Think of it like painting over mold." He went back to his desk, opening his browser like a man about to commit a small act of treason. Within minutes, a new thread appeared on a niche tech forum. Help. Legacy compliance system throwing custodian undefined errors. Workaround hides problem. Core still inaccessible. He detailed the symptoms, carefully stripping out any company identifiers, hoping someone would suggest a magic bullet. On my end, the post popped up in one of my filtered feeds. I recognized the phrasing immediately. Jonas had been in enough of my training sessions to parrot the way I described system behavior. I read the thread, the replies starting to trickle in with vague guesses and half-baked scripts, none of which would work. My cursor hovered over the reply button for a moment before I scrolled past. There was nothing to add, nothing I was willing to give. The only fix was the one person they'd shown the door, and they'd made it clear my presence wasn't valued. Somewhere above Jonas's cubicle, Declan was probably taking another victory lap, convinced the day had been saved. But the shell wouldn't hold forever. The lock was still in place, the countdown still running, and the cracks were only getting deeper beneath the surface. At 8:50 a.m., Boardroom B was already tense. Declan sat at the head of the table, flipping through a slideshow filled with bullet points about operational stability and modernization progress. The people around him nodded politely, though their eyes kept drifting toward their phones, checking alerts they weren't ready to share aloud. He was midway through a line about seamless system transitions when the glass doors slammed open hard enough to rattle the water glasses. Adrian Cross stepped in, suit jacket unbuttoned, eyes sharp, moving like a man who'd been running. In his right hand was a thick blue folder, the edges bent from his grip. He didn't sit. He didn't even look at the screen. He walked straight to the center of the table and let the folder drop with a thud. The top page slid out just far enough for the bold red header to be visible. Notice of federal contract suspension. System integrity unverified. Where is she? Adrian's voice was a bellow, sharp enough to cut through every whispered doubt in the room. Declan blinked, trying for composure. If you mean Lyra Halden, I'm referring to the keystone of this company's compliance system, Adrian shot back, voice rising. The person you fired. The only certified custodian keeping $320 million in government contracts alive. Murmurs broke out along the table, chairs shifting. Declan tried again, his tone softening under the weight of every pair of eyes now locked on him. We've redistributed her responsibilities. Adrian cut him off. You can't redistribute a federal certification. Declan, we are hours from losing everything. He pointed at the suspension notice like it was a death sentence. Do you have a replacement custodian verified with the Federal Registry? Declan's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced down at his notes, as if an answer might have appeared there while he wasn't looking. Adrian straightened, scanning the table. Find her. Now, or start drafting explanations for the board about why you dismantled the one safeguard keeping us operational. The room stayed silent. The only sound, the faint ticking of the conference clock counting down toward the moment no one could take back. At exactly 9 a.m., every monitor in the operations wing went red, across dashboards, spreadsheets, and secure terminals. The same line blinked in stark white text, custodian role vacated, all contract systems suspended. There was no fanfare, no alarm, just that steady, clinical message stretching across 3 floors of glass and steel. Within seconds, workflows froze. Procurement's renewal queue locked in place. Finance's payment processing stalled mid-transaction, and the compliance audit console went dark. By 9:02, the first government notices were hitting inboxes. The Department of Defense issued a suspension pending custodial reassessment. The Office of Logistics followed, citing clause violations that halted all active projects. Even the smallest, the same red flag, authorization invalid. Declan was in his office, headset half on, firing off rapid instructions no one could follow. He typed my name into an email for the 5th time that morning. The subject lines growing more desperate. Please call me back. Urgent. We can fix this. Lyra, you're the only one who can stop this. My phone buzzed where it sat on the counter beside me. I didn't pick it up. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving a thin light across my kitchen. I poured another cup of coffee, steady and unhurried, the mug warming my hands. Somewhere across the city, I imagined the air in that boardroom growing heavier with every passing minute. Adrian would be standing now, leaning over the table while legal scrambled through procedural dead ends, and Helena scrolled through logs she already knew by heart. The system was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, protect itself from mishandling, even if that mishandling came from inside. The clock they'd ignored had run out, and there was no override left to pull. By 9:10, the company was no longer in control of its own contracts. The vault had sealed itself, and the keystone was nowhere in sight. The cafe was warm, the kind of warmth that seeps into your shoulders and makes the rest of the world feel far away. I sat by the window with a paperback open in front of me, the steam from my coffee curling upward, untouched, outside. The sidewalks were still damp from the morning drizzle, the glass catching a muted shimmer of light. My phone buzzed against the table, skittering slightly on the wood. Then again, and again. Declan's name, then Helena's, then a number I didn't recognize, probably legal. A few seconds later, Adrian's name flashed across the screen. I watched the display light up and fade, until it finally went dark. I reached out, not to answer, but to hold the power button until the screen went black for good. The sudden stillness felt like a curtain dropping between me and them. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in imagining their scramble, no hunger for whatever explanations they were spinning to the board or the government agencies now holding their contracts hostage. What I felt was lighter, unburdened. For 15 years, I'd been the quiet constant in a machine that rarely noticed its own heartbeat. I'd been there through failures no one else even knew had happened, holding things together with knowledge, patience, and a stubborn refusal to let it fall apart on my watch. But that watch was over. I hadn't burned the bridge. They'd walked off it themselves, convinced the ground would still be there when they looked down. All I'd done was step aside and let them see how far the drop really was. I closed the book over my thumb, sipped the coffee before it went completely cold, and watched a couple pass outside, laughing under a shared umbrella. Somewhere across the city, glass doors were slamming, voices were rising, and systems were still locked in place. I left my tip on the table and stood, sliding the book into my bag. The bell over the cafe door chimed as I stepped back into the open air, the quiet settling in around me like it had been waiting all along.